YouTube Foundation backdoors. We are digitizing to our Foundation broadcast servers. Everyone will soon be able to see what we are discussing, especially once all of this information is properly vetted by me. We have got the information set. We have got the photographic evidence. We have got the title. We have got the description. We are beaming live. We are checking the YouTube chat, pulling it up in 5, 4, 3, 2. YouTube chat is up and active. The stream is live. Welcome, Elise and everyone else who has joined the stream before. We are now ready to go live. In 3, 2, 1. Hooah. I don't know why I hooah'd. Welcome. Hey there, Foundation staff. This is Level 2 researcher Theron Sherman, but you can call me Sherm. Welcome to another anomalous broadcast from Site-42. For those of you unfamiliar with our show, the rundown goes like this. Number 1, I read you an SCP document. B, I open up the floor to the community to discuss what we've read. We're often visited by SCP authors, staff, and fans. And if we're lucky, the author of the article themselves shows up to share some insight. Remember that if you'd like to join the conversation yourself, you can join us on the Get Vocal app during the show and get on camera, and we'll also be monitoring the YouTube and Get Vocal text chats. Also remember that if you really enjoy the show, leave some likes and comments to let us know, and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/site42. Tonight's article is SCP-5040, titled Chino Namida, or Tears of Blood, written by PeppersGhost. And lucky for us, PeppersGhost has decided to join us on the show this evening, and so the windows are open. You can jump on cam, my friend. I'll put on my headphones so I can hear you.
Hello.
Good evening, sir. Introduce yourself.
Good evening. I am PeppersGhost, article of SCP-5040, which we'll be discussing this evening, as well as SCP-4000 and many others.
Fantastic. Do you have anything you'd like to say to introduce this piece for tonight?
So the thing that you have to keep in mind while you're reading this is pretty much one-to-one with a nightmare that I had in November of 2018. It is a dream that I woke up, I thought, man, I'm glad that was just a dream, and then I thought, I have to write this down, and that's what I did.
Fantastic. You are the opening salvo for the item number, so why don't you get us started?
All right. Item number 5040, Level 2 Restricted, Containment Class Euclid, Disruption Class Kanik, Risk Class Notice. Foundation web crawler Kappa-08 Shinigami is to seek and suppress all references to SCP-5040 in online discussions and entertainment news. Anti-memetic inoculations against the propagation of SCP-5040 are in development.
Description. SCP-5040 is a non-existent Japanese horror film entitled Chino Namida, or Tears of Blood, which spontaneously manifests in human memories. Those affected by SCP-5040 will remember going to see the film even when their supposed attendance would contradict empirical evidence. SCP-5040 afflictions may occur in any place where movies are shown, including cultures where its content would usually be prohibited. Subtitles and/or dubbing will be used when appropriate. Descriptions of the film are always similar in nature, as are the circumstances and events surrounding the viewing. However, reports of SCP-5040's story and characters are never fully consistent, and the film's setting, subplots, character names, and much of the dialogue will be different for each viewer. Casting also varies and appears largely arbitrary. A broad variety of Japanese performers and entertainment personalities, both living and deceased, have been said to star in the film, even when the actor in question has no real-life associations with the horror genre. Despite these differences, the film's beginning, climax, and ending consistently hew to the same general plot. See Document 5040 Prime. After conducting more than 300 interviews, researchers have constructed a detailed synopsis of SCP-5040's most consistent story elements, and the most common sequence of events associated with the viewer's memory of their screening attendance. See Document 5040 Prime. And so Addendum 5040 Prime. Screenings always begin at sunset. If a subject had prior commitments for that day and time, they learn that the commitment was abruptly canceled or resolved through unforeseen circumstances. The subject decides to spend their free time by seeing a movie at a local theater. Upon arrival, they see a large crowd gathered at the box office and learn the entire theater has been reserved for a special event, a one-time only screening of a rare, critically acclaimed film. Admission is free. Drawn in by the excitement, the subject indulges their curiosity and gets in line for a ticket. Most seats are already occupied when the subject reaches the auditorium, but they find an empty space in the back. They notice that a large number of people throughout the attendance wear disposable face masks, even if this practice is not common in the local culture. The woman who takes the seat next to the subject wears one such mask, as does the woman beside her. The remaining seats are quickly taken, but patrons continue to file in. By the time the lights dim, the audience completely fills the aisles and stairs, leaving the areas around the exits standing room only. An IV pole carrying a bag of unknown fluid may be seen protruding from the crowd, but with no clear indication of who it is connected to. The subject might also notice that elsewhere in the theater, one of the masked audience members wears a hospital gown. There are no trailers or advertisements before the film. The theater goes silent when it begins.
The film opens with the female protagonist going about her mundane activities in her day-to-day life. She is interrupted by a phone call from an unknown party who tells her that a loved one has been hospitalized. When the protagonist leaves her apartment to go to the hospital, she is attacked by a male assailant and loses consciousness. When the protagonist wakes up, she finds herself in an unfamiliar building with her arms and legs bound. She is accompanied by a number of other female captives, some of whom still remain unconscious. The women briefly discuss the possibility of an escape, but are interrupted when the kidnapper appears. He sees one of the women crying and kills her without hesitation. The kidnapper explains that he intends to release the captives after 24 hours, but only under the condition that they do not cry. Throughout the film, the kidnapper exacts various forms of physical and psychological torture on the group. Despite their best efforts, captives prove unable to hold back their tears and are murdered one by one, until only the protagonist remains. Frustrated by the protagonist's resolve, the kidnapper gradually escalates her torture. However, the protagonist only responds with rebukes, which angers the kidnapper even further.
As the protagonist makes a speech against the kidnapper, the subject notices what seems to be a slight echo to the dialogue. They eventually realize that the two masked women sitting beside them are softly repeating every line of dialogue as it occurs. If they look further, they will see that the lower half of the women's masks are saturated with saliva and their hands are clasped together so tightly that their fingernails have begun to draw blood.
At the film's climax, the kidnapper approaches the protagonist with a double-edged razor blade and announces that even if she is freed, she will spend the rest of her life horribly disfigured. This leads to an argument between the two, which touches on themes such as the nature of inner and outer beauty, the value of women in society, and the societal stigma against expressions of vulnerability. Eventually, the kidnapper loses patience, throws the protagonist to the floor, and grabs her face.
From this point onward, the subject hears groans from unidentified members of the audience.
Gripping the protagonist's lower lip between his thumb and forefinger, the kidnapper takes the razor blade and cuts a deep fissure from the corner of her mouth to her chin. He works the blade across her face using a rough sawing motion until her lower lip is partially amputated. He pauses to mock the protagonist, and she uses the opportunity to grab the razor from him with her teeth. Before the kidnapper can react, she slices his left eye open. The kidnapper screams as blood and vitreous humor spill from his face, allowing time for the protagonist to maneuver the razor to her fingers and cut through her bindings. Enraged and half-blind, the kidnapper grabs the remaining flap of the protagonist's lower lip and pulls, sharply, tearing it from her face, along with a large strip of her right cheek. The kidnapper expresses his satisfaction. The protagonist finally finishes freeing herself and slits the kidnapper's throat with the razor.
Whereas the film's previous murders often differ between manifestations, all interviewees All interviewees gave consistent descriptions of the violent climax and displayed a greater degree of clarity in their recollection of this scene than at any other point in the film. Approximately 80% of subjects also reported that the movie's climax was accompanied by a profound sense of dread, but did not attribute that feeling to the movie itself.
The protagonist hurries to the exit as the kidnapper bleeds to death on the floor. Although her speech is impeded by her injuries, she pauses before leaving to mock the kidnapper one last time, calmly telling him that he cried tears of blood, and therefore had to die according to his own rules. The film abruptly cuts to an unspecified point in the future. Now wearing a mask to hide her disfigured face, the protagonist walks down the street to her apartment, ignoring a crowd of paparazzi around her. When she finally reaches her bedroom, the protagonist calmly takes off her mask and looks at herself in the mirror. She stares silently at the missing lower portion of her face and sheds a tear. Over the course of several minutes, her weeping slowly builds into frenzied sobs and shrieks. The film cuts to black and the credits roll, but the sound of the protagonist's cries continue to play with no other audio until the credit reel ends.
The other audience members largely remain silent after the movie ends, exchanging only whispers as they exit the theater. Subjects have claimed to have seen small red puddles and stains on the theater floor on their way out. Those who remain past this point will experience an escalating feeling of unwelcomeness until they are driven to leave. Whew! Man. That is an intense story. That is an intense movie. Oh, man.
I thank you.
And I mean, like, viscerally, like, I read this earlier when you mentioned that we would pimp this article. I was like, yes, let's do this article. And I read it real quick and I read through it. But like, there's something every time you read an article word for word and you're reading it out loud, the images get a little more real.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see this movie in my head. The film nerd in me is freaking out because the tropes, like the Saw-esqueness, the Japanese horror movie film tropes, are all here. I guess, what kind of cinephile are you that you wrote this in that way?
See, here's the thing. I used to be so terrified of horror films that I just read the descriptions on Wikipedia. And when I got older, I started watching them for real, but there's still probably hundreds more films that I am generally aware of the idea of the film. And in some cases, what I ended up seeing on screen later on was actually not as bad as I had imagined it in the first place. So that might have factored into the construction of this.
The horror you don't see, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting. Because, yeah, exactly what I imagined there. Like, I can imagine the scenes as they were. Elise in the YouTube chat is just like, you really dreamt this?
Yeah.
All right, so tell us about this dream. How did this dream become this article?
Well, once I stopped screaming, I knew that this had to be an SCP of some sort. Or a screenplay, but that is kind of outside my depth. So SCP it would be. But it also presented an interesting structural dilemma, which I wrestled with really up until this was posted, which is, how do I convey this dream of viewing a narrative for myself in a narrative form? Because, you know, there's two layers to it. There's the movie, and then there's the person who is viewing the movie, which is actually where the tangible story is taking place. And there's an interplay between what is on screen and what you're seeing that I think creates a different connotation to what's on the screen in the first place. And the reason it took me so long to do this was because I really wanted to comment on the movie itself. And there's things that I really wanted to explore. And there's like issues of feminism, like the huge violence. One of the things that kind of held me back from wanting to post this is because there's a lot of violence against women in this. And that is also such a common horror trope that the commentary was already there. I felt I didn't need to say anything more in the article itself, at least. That's the conclusion I came to.
Like, the first thing, because I do the YouTube channel, because I have, like, I'm working towards getting big enough to like do like live action SCP films like you see people trying to scramble do all the time. And so in my head I see the like thriller-esque in the theater view of like them watching the movie, panning to the women, saying every line along with the screen. And then what's on the screen looks like a combination of like, you know, Parasite level, like slow burn, quiet scenes interspersed with like the quick violence of like, I don't know, any good like martial artsy horror movie where like it's a violence, not like a ghost violence, but like a human murder violence. Oh man, it's just so cool. I'm freaking out.
I'm glad you like it.
This would be a really cool like short film of like the log of this going back and forth between that.
And I really like how you pointed out that there's two different kinds of horror going on. You know, you have the really quick cuts of like the kind of thriller movie, and then you have the slow burn stuff with what's going on in the theater. And that is intentional to some degree. Like, there's the immediacy of the violence and the gruesomeness of, you know, a lady having her face ripped off, basically, her lips ripped off. But then you have the psychological aspect where this movie is terrible. Like, it's a scary movie, and like, we like those and we celebrate them to an extent. But there's something just so eerie about people who kind of celebrate that more than we feel comfortable with. And I think that's kind of the underlying fear that probably ended up seeding that idea.
Yeah, there's a couple. There's what was it? SCP something is like a narrative spirit that will like straight up murder you if you do body horror in your stories.
Like, oh, is there?
Yeah.
Well, I'm dead.
It is a vengeance story. It is a vengeful spirit that will mess you up if you're doing that kind of story. They're like, oh yeah, that's so. Except it's kind of backwards because they also like tempt you into it. They're like, oh, but wouldn't it be better if it was more like this? And then if you do it, they kill you. So it's kind of rude.
I'll need to look that one up.
Let me see if I can remember which one it is. It's in series 4, which is the 3000s, right?
It sounds like a series 4 SCP.
Mm-hmm. SCP-36 something. Search. SCP-3. I'll have to get it later because I cannot remember it off the top of my head. Dang it. All right, I'll come back to this one if it pulls up.
Whoever wrote that is probably watching this and shaking their fist right now.
You're next. All right, so how was your critique process for this article? You've had it stewing for a while then.
Yeah, this has been sitting on the back burner since November 2018, and it's passed through several hands, critique-wise, since then. And really, this thing that people kept coming back to was there's so many twists and turns to this that like interplay between the different scenes, because I used to have them split up. The addendum used to be a interview with somebody who had watched the film and was explaining the process of watching it, and then after that was a summary of the film. And so you're mimicking my hand gestures. I can see that.
That's exactly what it is. That's how it's an international symbol.
But it didn't capture the feeling that I had in the dream, and it felt janky, and the reveals didn't happen in quite the right order. Like, you're supposed to kind of realize what is underneath the masks right as soon as the person watching the film does when they get to that particular part of the movie. And, you know, the repeating of the dialogue, just everything kind of came together once I cut it all up and put them together. And I kept wanting to put in comments from the director of the film or have a viewer comment on it. Again, just wanting to expand the lore and provide more resolution. And the more I tried to put into it, the less pure nightmare it was, I guess. And so really, this is unique in that it's the only SCP where the writing process was more of an unwriting process and just taking things out over and over again until I had just the bare bones, what you see right now.
It's funny how articles on the site go both ways. Sometimes you get the critique and you're just like, no, there's not enough here. There's not enough story. There's not enough something. We're missing something. And it needs more. It needs more. You got to flesh it out. And then sometimes you just got to you got to kill your darlings. And you're just like, no, cut this, cut that, gone. And when you were saying it, I imagined the version that was interview log and then film log. And I was like, yeah, I can see how separating the stories, you'd have to like go back and forth. And I've never seen it formatted where I was a little confused when I first started reading it, how this format was working. And it was a little prose-like, but it exactly got the point across. And you could feel like moment to moment, the amping tension throughout it that wouldn't have worked if it was separated.
Yeah. And that was something that it just clicked at the last minute. It's kind of like Taboo. The bit with the containment procedure, or sorry, the containment breaches came at the very last minute. It was a last minute addition where it's like, this is what it was missing. And in Tears of Blood, once I got over that hurdle of like, oh, this article can be whatever I want it to be. I don't have to actually follow a set structure. Because I kept thinking like, how do I do this without breaking the rules? And then I was like, wait a second, screw the rules.
Yeah, that's really hard with the SCPs because like there is the format and there's bits and there's stretches, and sometimes you will just get that ding of like, oh, I like this article, but the format janky isn't justified. And it's like, ah, man. But when you justify it, if you can justify the change and you can make it like fit both in universe and in your story's purpose, then yeah, you can get away with murder pretty easily. So I found that article, by the way. I was toying with my phone during part of this, and I found it. It is SCP-3616. It's titled Writer's Block. And that is the vengeful, you make body horror stories, and because you kill your characters, I kill you.
Gotcha.
And that's just a bad day. Okay, so critique process, nightmare genesis. You mentioned that these song lyrics in your description mean something. I'm curious about that.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I hide Easter eggs in the lyrics that I put at the top of my author's comments because people just do that for funsies. You know, things are kind of related, but, you know, don't really say much about the SCP itself. Every now and then I'll do something that's actually relevant to what's going on in the backstory that I didn't maybe want to include in the article proper. At the top of the author's comment, we have, in this case, the song is instrumental. It's from Castlevania. It's the song Tears of Blood. I couldn't not have the song be Tears of Blood on Tears of Blood. So the quote's actually from the game. It is, "The blood in my veins is cursed. It's best for the world if I disappear, now and forever." And again, like I had this dream, and the dream came to me with no meaning, and I kind of had to apply meaning onto it. And in my authorial headcanon, I do think that this film used to exist. You asked me earlier why a non-existent film would have a poster or poster art. And I said, well, maybe it's, you know, fan art. But I think that the movie did exist at one point, and somebody was like, you know what? This has gone too far. Something's happening with this movie. Maybe the Anomaly was originally this cult following that the movie had. And so they were like, maybe it's just better that we take this and remove it from reality altogether. Maybe the creator of the film did that. There's feelings of authorial regret, might be the undercurrent of this, ironically enough.
Authorial regret. And I imagine, let's say you were someone who made this movie, you'd have to, and you made it for a reason in the first place before you regretted it. So maybe, and the paparazzi are coming after you, so at the end of the movie, so that's part of it. So yeah, if you survived this and you had this whole high and mighty speech about inner versus outer beauty and surviving and being strong, and then in the end, even when you go to tell your story and be strong and stand out, there's still that little niggling voice in the back of your head, that insecurity, and it's on your face that you can't hide from it. And so maybe you just start to regret putting everything out there when that insecurity gets too great.
Mm-hmm. And it's I don't think it's any coincidence that I had this dream shortly after I won SCP-4000's contest, and suddenly this thing I had written blew up more than anything else. And it's in other people's hands. Other people can interpret it however they want. They can read certain things into it, and I don't regret writing it at all. But this is everything I write is a little part of myself in some way, and putting it in somebody else's hands is a scary process every time. And that's why I really admire people who cold post or maybe get discouraged if their first SCP doesn't do well. It's like that takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to go out there and like set yourself up for critique.
A 100% yes. And just as a pop culture reference, in case you're giving me a lot of vibes now from, are you familiar with the Stanley Parable? Or
yes!
The Beginner's Guide?
I love the Stanley Parable.
Everything you just said to me is the story of Davey Reedon, the guy who made the Stanley Parable, and then going into his next game, The Beginner's Guide. Because
that one.
So if you go on the YouTube sphere, there's so many discussions of these two games. And the idea is that for the Stanley Parable, he made this game with multiple endings, with all the good snark. But what happened is people took not only the game to dissecting it and dissecting what it meant, but they also started dissecting what it meant that he made it and who he was as a person because he made this game. And when your sense of self is now some game critiquers playground to play with, and they're like saying things about you that might not actually be you and stuff like that, you start to go, oh no. And so his next game, The Beginner's Guide, is an entire diatribe into what you can actually know about someone by their work or what you can't know, and what you put into it of yourself doing the game when you're writing, when you are debating someone else's work. What does reading someone else's work say more about you than it says about the author?
And he does that through the format of a game.
Which also catch-22s all the critics, because they're trying to talk about what he meant during the game, except now it's what they think he meant during the game, and maybe he didn't mean that, maybe they think he meant that.
Okay, I need to play this. Sorry, Bayonetta. I have something new in my queue.
It is, the game itself is great, and then the discourse is incredible. Like, I think specifically I follow, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I think it was Folding Ideas and Innuendo Studios, who I followed their video essays on both games, and watching them go back and forth on their own, folding in on themselves was like super interesting and philosophical. So yes, that is my suggestion for you to go do some homework now.
I definitely worry about how people will think of me by reading my stuff, because I write a lot of horror stuff, and I don't really consider myself a very horrific person, but I get into some dark crap. And there are some characters that I write who don't talk anything like how I talk. And so, I wouldn't show this stuff to my grandma. There's stuff that I, even feel kind of nervous showing to my boyfriend sometimes, where it's like, hey, I wrote this thing about a woman getting her face torn off. Here we go.
Just to let you know, this is the stuff that's in my head. Don't freak out.
Exactly. So it's fun to now have something that's kind of pure id in my repertoire of articles. And that anxiety, I can relate to that from the Beginner's Guide that you were explaining.
Now, I'm going to take this opportunity. This show normally runs 30 to 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how long the article is and how long we just bullshit, because that's what we talk about art and we get tangents to video games about things. It happens, But I got to bring this back because I have to talk about just everything you've ever done.
Okay.
So what happens on this wiki, and a lot of people I know people also appreciate your work a lot, just me, because I see when people are like in the discussion, like, oh shit, PeppersGhost is back, let's do this. And like, you came back from a hiatus with, I think it was Botnik-J, and people were like, oh god, PeppersGhost is back, bringing the good stuff. And so I have so many of your article, I have Botnik-J on Site-42 because I had to read it because it was amazing. And it was a really fun reading to do. Last month, SCP Illustrated did 1861, the crew of the HMS Wintersheimer. And he asked me to guest spot in, be the final D class in the interview. And it was so emotional. It was so emotional. It was such good times. I felt feelings, man. And then I recently did all... Say again?
I said I didn't know about that one. I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah, that's on SCP Illustrated's channel. Alma Mater, I just recently did like in the last 2 weeks. And I have a soft spot for articles that are like how dark the Foundation can be with its staff when it comes to like getting people and not preparing them enough, or just the meat grinder of Foundation staff. That is a grim, dark kind of canon that I can get behind really wholeheartedly, just as a guilty pleasure. And then,
I mean, they're all red shirts. The whole thing about the Foundation is like, it doesn't matter if you have a PhD, you're still a red shirt.
You're going to get eaten by something eventually. That's just how it goes.
It's just a matter of time.
And then finally, my top favorite thing until what I found today. My top favorite thing is that of your specific work is I am a giant fan of Dr. Spanko. I absolutely adore that creature and doing its voice on my channel because it is the most fun Homestar Runner-esque voice that I can pull out. And then when I was reading A Diminished Thing, my heart shattered. And the actor in me who got just like, anytime you get something with that much drama to chew on, that much like angst and anger and despair, it's just like, this is the content I'm here for.
I'm glad you pulled out angst on that one, because I'll acknowledge that like taking the most like cheerful, wacky, zany, happy-go-lucky character like Dr. Spanko, probably the silliest character in the whole wiki, and then trying to go grimdark with it was a very I'm sorry John moment for me, I guess.
It's something that happens like after you read it like 5 or 6 times when you're doing your takes. You start to do like alternate readings of how it's going. And so my flaw as an actor, the first thing I do is everything is yelling and angry in my head. I have all this cheery energy as a person, and then every time I read something like on a script, it comes out angry. And I'm not sure why I'm not sure what that says about me. But once I go through it a couple more times and I'm like, okay, what if I took this down? What if I made this more sorrowful? What if it broke my heart. It broke my heart. That poor man.
I'm glad. Anytime I can write the word snackulations and make somebody like make their heart break.
And also, it's also a Foundation People Are Red Shirt story. Let's not forget that you brought that back again.
Oh yes.
Because this could happen to any of us. It could be you next time, motherfucker. But then I found Pounded in the Butt by Screaming Bristle Beacon from Site Everything. I found that today while I was looking at your author page.
That's on the list of things I'm not showing to my grandmother. That's
fair. Have you seen the wikis? So for everybody who doesn't know what that is both PeppersGhost made another Botnik article, but this time it's a tale. And it's also a Chuck Tingle parody.
And the way Botnik works is you have to feed it a lot of content. And so for this one, I fed it the wiki, but I also fed it Chuck Tingle. So this is kind of their love child, their creepy mutant DNA ecto baby.
And I'm not going to say I've read a lot of Chuck Tingle because I haven't, but I'm familiar with the work. Enough to see that the sentence structures, that the things that are happening here are just, wow, this could just be the book. And on that note, I have to ask, are you familiar with the other Chuck Tingle work that's on the wiki? Which is SCP-4513.
That was a JamCon one, wasn't it?
I don't know. Maybe. It was pounded in the butt with Moby Dick by my IRS W-2 tax form.
Oh, yes, I've heard about this.
That was... I immediately saved yours into my tabs because that's getting a tale in the next... That's getting a reading on the channel in the next week. But then this one, because it's an SCP article and it has like different settings, I actually got to go in and like put pirate ship sounds in for the Moby Dick section and their sound design and stuff like that. But oh my lord, there are 2 Chuck Tingle books on the wiki now.
I'm so glad. And I have read that one, and it is brilliant. You guys should take it out.
Looking at the text chat for a minute, we asked if the SCP-5040, could that be related to Are We Cool Yet in some way? Is that a AWCY tangent? Is that possible? It's an interpretation.
It is. And I think that there is a distinction to be made here because I honestly don't know if the movie itself is anomalous. I think the anomaly is like the experience of the movie. Like, and that may just seem like, you know, splitting hairs, but
I mean, honestly, if I were going to try and feed into this Are We Cool Yet tangent idea, that seems like the exact thing that they would do if there was some sort of meaning to this movie that had to be put out there, if there was something for that. The fact that they would keep it running as a Rocky Horror Picture Show style, as a The Room style, continuing midnight movie sect, when it was like someone's trying to stop this from happening, they keep putting on the show. If they had a reason for it, maybe?
And there may be more coming in that department. Yeah, if you look at the caption for the poster, it mentions the Chattanooga Film Society, which may be connected to Are We Cool Yet, and may be connected to a couple of other things that have been sitting in my sandbox for 2 years. So,
oh my love, the spider web, the spider web.
Yes, you may be onto something there.
And so the other thing we asked is, what was that? I have to get close to the thing because it's small text. Hello, new people. Yes, you are new. The channel is amazing. Thank you so much. Make sure to like the video and all that stuff. Comment and things. Share us. We're very small. We're recovering from dead channel disease. Dead channel disease, I discovered, is when your YouTube channel has great growth for a while, and then you start making less content and get less views. The algorithm decides you don't exist anymore.
Oh, no.
And so we have 10,000 subscribers, but we have like 200 views a video because the algorithm just doesn't put us out there. And so right now we're in a series where we're doing like 3 videos in a week, and we're trying to bump ourselves back up so we get some viewers again. So thank you guys for liking us. We're trying. I don't know what a Brian-y Brian voice is. What is a Brian-y Brian voice, Insanity Major?
Brainy Brian?
Brainy Brian.
From Dark Stuff's Vendafriend?
Oh, that's what he's asking me to read on this show. He wants to do Vendafriend. And Brady Brian. So I do not know. I've not read Vendafriend, so I'm not familiar with that.
Tisk.
I know I've heard the name 1,000 times because I know it's a big, like, awesome series. Dark Stuff's been on before, actually. He's going to start pimping his new series on the show soon.
Oh, cool.
But, okay, so now I need to do this just so that next week when Insanity Major asks to... Each week in the chat, Insanity Major is reminding me that once I run out of the current canon that I'm doing every time I don't have a guest, which is currently the Shattered Thoughts canon, the next no guest canon is Vendafriend. And so I'll try and get a Brainy Brian voice for you by next week. That way you're prepared for when Vendafriend happens.
No. You should establish the voice first and find out the character later.
establish the voice first.
Yes. And then you just have to commit to that voice when you end up reading the tales.
No. Brainy Bryant, take one. Hello, Insanity Major. I'm Brainy Brian. I've got all the brains. The brains are in my heads. The brains are in my butts. My butt's brains are bigger than my brains because my brains only got one brain, but my butt's brains got one brain. Yeah.
Okay, so Brainy Brian is Steven Tyler. That's what we've learned here.
There we go. Perfection.
I love it.
All right. With this bus going way off the rails, do you have any last things you want to say out to our viewing audience?
Yes, read Acquisitions by S. Reagan. It's long, but it's worth it, you plebeians. Please do.
Acquisitions by S. Reagan. Read it, you plebes. Give it the votes. It obviously deserves the votes. Last question on my list for the show. What is your favorite or multiple favorite articles or tales on the wiki outside of your own work?
Acquisitions by S. Reagan. It's long, but it's worth it, you plebeians.
All right, we're going in.
They wrote a whole novel, and it's only at like 128. Like, I know that's like a high amount for an article, but it's a novel, guys.
There is a novel called Acquisitions, and you are going to go read it because PeppersGhost told you to. Fantastic. I did not know that they got that long on the site. I'm wondering, like, I knew there were series, but wow, how many words is that?
I don't know. I haven't actually like run the numbers yet. I just know that like I was on a bus trip to California and that's what I read. And that was like an exceptional use of time.
An exceptional use of time. Excellent. You guys heard it. Acquisitions by S. Reagan on the wiki. It's only at plus 120 something and it needs more love. Tales need more love in general. Novel-sized tales need more love. My article that I have one tale and it has like 8,500 words, which is like long, but not that long. But like it's got like plus 43. And that's because like so many people have written things for that canon that like it keeps getting bumps accidentally. But like, no, long articles and tales need love. That is the end of the day. Articles.
Amen.
Tales, long tales, long stories. Learn to read, people. Learn to read.
Preach!
All right. Say your last speech to the audience, PeppersGhost.
Your last speech to the audience, PeppersGhost.
He nailed it. Hire that man. Give him a pay raise. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Hey, thanks for having me, sure.
Hope we see you again. Remember, come on to Pimp Articles and also just come on and be a guest when other people are here because there are two other windows. If anybody in the YouTube chat, remember, you can come on and be on the show. The windows are here. We have 2 more windows for people. Come be guests. It's fun times. We're having fun here. Yes.
It's a good time.
But until next time, everybody, that is the end of our show for the evening. Thank you to PeppersGhost and our wonderful audience on the YouTube and the Get Vocal text chats. Remember to like and subscribe and become a patron if you'd like to support the show. And we will see you at our next Anomalous Broadcast from Site-42. Cheers. Which is the weirdest way I possibly could have said that. Good night, guys.